Jerome, thanks very much. A very warm welcome to everybody, and in particular to Julia and Tim, our co-presenters this afternoon. Just to add, the recording will be made available along with the slides after today's happy hour. Before I hand over to Julia, I just wanted to give a very brief background to some of our work, and also to reflect that a year on, who would have thought that we would be in a situation where lockdown is only just about to sort of unlock itself. This time last year, I know I was running a couple of sessions for two-day events for a major housing operator in Leeds, and we were watching nervously what was happening across in the Far East. And that nervousness was also because next week, a year ago next week, we were due to hold our annual conference in Manchester. And of course, with a couple of days' notice, we had to put that on hold. But what that has done for us is really think about how we develop our digital offer. We set out back in February last year a digital strategy for the LIN to implement within 3 years. We actually implemented it within 3 months. I'm sure many of you joining us will have very similar conversations and recollections of your own organisations. But part of that is to take the happy design principles and create this happy hour. And what a few of you will know, and Julia in particular, is that pre-COVID, Julia and I and a few others used to meet and have happy hours at various locations to share a drink and have a really good, meaningful conversation, to exchange ideas and network. And doing this digitally has proved very successfully, and the happy hour brand that the LIN has created is very well established. And indeed, we used that for our annual summit that we then had held in December. And we look forward to doing so again later this year. And finally, just to say, this is the 10th anniversary of the Housing LIN's independence of the Department of Health. It's great that we've been able to maintain our services, and it wouldn't be without the support of a number of key sponsors. And personally, can I both thank Julia and Tim for being a stalwart and supporting the LIN through thick and thin. I know it's tough times out there, but your support has really enabled us to flourish at a difficult period. So thank you very much. Anyway, you haven't come to watch and listen to me, you've come to hear the experts talk. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to the Chief Executive of Central and Cecil, Julia Ashley.
Hi, thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, it's really good to be here, actually, and thanks for having us. I'm just going to share my screen a minute, if you just bear with me, and we will take you through. Right, can everybody see that as a presentation?
Yeah, if you go to slideshow and go from the first or from...
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought I had, sorry, apologies, I thought I'd put it on the slideshow. Okay, sorry, let's go from the first. We just need to go all the way back up. This is the joys of being online, isn't it? So yeah, good afternoon, everybody. And like I say, thank you, Jeremy, for inviting me today. It's really good to be here. And I've been asked to talk about today how we've been innovative and flexible in the face of a pandemic. And I guess what I'd really like to say is that I'm going to talk about what we've done, but really it's a reflection on what everybody else has done as well, because I know a lot of you have been doing these sort of things too, not just individually in our organisations, locally, nationally, but globally as well. It's just been an outstanding effort. For those that don't know me, my name's Julia Ashley. I'm Chief Exec of C&C. We're a 95-year-old housing and care provider for people aged over 55 in London. And yes, it's been some year, hasn't it? This guy called Theodore Levitt came up with this saying that creativity is thinking up new things and innovation is doing new things. And I just have to say that, by goodness, we've been thinking and doing on our feet at rapid pace all through the year, all of us. So I think we deserve to actually reflect right now and think about all those great things that we've done. It's actually a year ago today since Boris stood up and told us that things are going to be very disruptive, and how true that statement was. I guess back on Monday, March the 16th, none of us really thought a year on we'd still be battling with all of this. It's been a real journey, hasn't it? And we've been having to navigate across multiple things, mostly without a map or a compass. And these words that are all familiar words to us actually were very unfamiliar a year ago in this context. We've had to really rethink how we've managed risk, how we've communicated, how we've been through our businesses, how we've resourced all the things that needed to be done, how we've worked as teams and solved problems together and adapted and actually thrown sheer goodwill at all the problems that we've had to face. And I think all of us will have dealt with an impact. We've impacted on other people by being innovative and adaptable, but actually for many there's a real impact on ourselves as well, and it's, like I say, good to reflect on that moment. Kind of going back to day one for us really, because that's what this slide is, this presentation is all about. We started by thinking we had to get really organised, and back 6 days before Boris made his announcement, we put our management plan together, because by then we actually all knew what was coming. That was version 1. We're now on version 11 and just about to launch into version 12. And whilst we've adapted the plan as the rules have changed and how our approach has changed, actually the core plan stayed the same all the way through, and that's seen us well. We had a corporate objective to be agile, and that also saw us well, because luckily enough we'd already given out equipment to all our central teams, so they were able to get working from home within 3 days, I think it was. We had daily comms meetings at the time. They're still weekly, and that's a real benefit, I think, just carry on doing that. In the early days, PPE was obviously the most important thing, and we set up an email so that there was nobody on the front line that couldn't raise a flag if they needed more equipment. I think the board's become more agile, and that will be a lasting effect. That's going to carry on in the way that they meet to make decisions. And the way that we've managed to communicate across the whole business, meeting everybody at the same time, we would never really have thought of having an all company call so frequently, and we still do that, and they're really successful. And right in the early days, we had to adapt how we did risk assessments, particularly in our care services. And we put in place something really simple that could help us spot through trigger points, things that were coming over the horizon, and that saw us well too. We massively have focused on colleague wellbeing through the pandemic, as I know everybody has. We set up a wellbeing hub, and there's loads of resources on there. Over here we've got a still of a talk that was done by a lovely lady called Dr. Marina Paloma, who talked to our team about the importance of sleep through a sort of mental health and wellbeing focus. Many more mental health first aiders in the business. Here, opportunities for colleagues to get to know each other when they couldn't actually meet, particularly central office teams. So we had sort of fun interviews between different staff members on our all colleague calls, which is actually great fun, but it was really appreciated that people could get to know each other a bit better through the pandemic. And actually through the year, events like Black Lives Matter have been enormously important to our team, and giving people a platform to have their say through that was really key. And of course, there's been all the normal kind of activities and events for staff as well to try and get people together. We went on to transitioning really. This is a picture of one of our entertainers that would have been inside our homes and schemes at Christmas entertaining people, who actually sort of said, well, I'll just come and do it outside so people can have that entertainment from their window of their home, which is great. We've been transitioning from providing to enabling, particularly digital enablement, and trying to get residents and staff actually into a place where they feel like they can engage through a digital channel. And that's obviously been quite a journey, as you'd expect. Lots and lots of practical and emotional help was needed, and many of our partnerships are with small one-man bands, one-woman band, entertainers, activity, therapy providers, and actually they didn't have the right equipment to be able to deliver online services, and we really had to help them as well to get online. And obviously there's lots of tensions. Many of our schemes are central London, and our largest one is over 250 residents in close quarters, and actually trying to manage the tensions that existed through that has been a real challenge. And I take my hat off to everybody who's helped people to feel more relaxed through the pandemic. We've given out a lot of equipment, so we've been giving away free tablets for residents. We were already doing that in certain circumstances, but we rolled that out further. And whilst we had Wi-Fi in our communal areas, we realised that we had to make sure that nobody was going to be unable to engage because they didn't have a Wi-Fi connection. So we've been busy delivering dongles and all sorts of things to get people online. Like I say, we've been supporting partners to deliver, and we've been really engaged with people that can help us. So people like food banks and community schemes. There was one group in the community through the local butcher, the whole community started bringing food, and the local butcher coordinated that and brought it to schemes. Actually, this is a wonderful thing, but puts enormous pressure on the on-site team, and because they just have a lot more work to do to distribute it. Been helping with shopping and medicines, there are extra jobs for people on site, sorry. And we had e-newsletters, but we actually doubled the subscription to that through the pandemic and put a lot more activity and events out for people to join in with. A key thing that we did through, started about November last year, was our Winter Watch campaign, which was a real focus on making sure that people were going to be safe and well through the winter. And our loneliness and isolation survey was a key part of that, which I'll just touch on later, and there's the video later for that. And in our care homes, we put our winter visiting pods in because we really wanted residents and relatives to still be able to see each other despite the extreme lockdown that sort of happened over the winter, and that was really successful, and I'm so pleased that we were able to do that. It made a massive difference. Through the pandemic, we relaunched a new website, which was in our plan to do anyway, but it really helped us to do more online, and there's been with a really small team, we've put on so many things for people to engage with through the year, and I think we'll continue with some of that when we come out eventually from the pandemic, because for some people that's a much easier way to engage, including our resident assembly, which meant that people could still engage with influencing the way that we run the business, as well as getting involved in activities and events, which is really, really very important to us. This is a screenshot from our website, and we had a lot of stuff going on anyway, and most of this has been able to transition to online. Obviously our special events and outings couldn't really happen, and the intergenerational work has just been a little bit more difficult as well, and we haven't made the sort of progress that we'd have liked to on that. But on every other front, I think the team have done an extraordinary job, and the residents have been extraordinary in the way that they've engaged. So I wanted to really focus on some of the results. This is one of our home managers showing everybody in the care home that it's okay to get the vaccine, and if you deliver care like we do, that is an ongoing challenge. Most of our staff have been vaccinated, but there is a cohort that are just too frightened to, and we have to continue to find more innovative ways to engage and build that confidence. So this is a a group which is called the All Together Opera Choir, the resident choir, and this was them performing at the Old Vic in December 2019, I think it was. They've performed at the Royal Opera House, the Royal Albert Hall, Garsington Opera, the Old Vic, and most of our schemes they've attended to bring joy to residents. And singing is such an important thing, isn't it? It just makes, you know, everything go away. It just helps our well-being. So we transitioned this online this year, which was incredibly challenging, much more so than you'd think. But they were still singing, so I think that was a real accomplishment in itself. Very difficult to coordinate a lot of singers all singing at the same time online. Fitness is a really key thing for us in the organisation. We believe that no matter what age, you should be able to engage in fitness. And of course, this used to be through wonderful, inspiring people coming into our homes and schemes and services to you know, get people up and moving. This all had to transition online as well. But the joy of this is actually we were having, these are 3 of our care homes, we were having inter-care home activities, and that was great fun for residents. And actually I think got them more engaged because it was fun and it was new and it was something to really get people's attention and get people engaged. This is a lovely lady called Maria Harvey, who's an aromatherapist that would have come into our care homes and given, personally given therapy for our residents, and which actually has made a big difference for many years. But here she is teaching our care staff to be aromatherapists and deliver a therapy in the home. And what a wonderful new skill for these people to learn and get engaged with, which was just fantastic. I said we work with a lot of supporters and people that help us in the business to do different and new things. And here's one of them, Inky Cloak, which is a wonderful Camden-based theatre company that has been engaging with our LGBTQ community and has put some online drama activities out for our residents, which has been really well received, and we're really thankful for their support on that. This is a group of people in Camden, where we have a scheme in Camden in Primrose Hill, and the local community all put together an event last summer, and these were all short 2 to 3 minute performances that people did on their front doorstep, and the company put this all together as one big performance. And here we have David here and Keith here playing bagpipes, and David was reciting a poem, and it was just a really joyful, wonderful sharing experience for our residents. We also engaged with people like Age UK that have come and done socially distanced talking groups for residents, which again have been really well received. And the importance of partners. We can't do it all ourselves, but there's so many people out there in the community that want to work with us and help. And our job is to facilitate that. And we're really so grateful for people that support us in this way. I was so heartwarmed by this story. Out on social media, one of our team asked for crafters to make some Christmas presents for our residents, and we got overwhelmed with the response, 176 gifts, and you can just see how beautiful they were, quilts and blankets and all sorts, each one with a special tag saying Merry Christmas to a resident. That would have made a huge difference to many, many people. And the most beautiful thing is that this is a group we're now engaged with nationwide. Even though we're a fairly small London-based organisation, we're suddenly in this crafting group, and only good things can come from this. It's really exciting, and they're very eager to engage with us on social art projects with our residents. So I think that's terrific. This is just an image of what I was talking about, our garden winter visiting pods in our care homes. I was seeing firsthand how, actually quite an emotional moment of seeing firsthand how important it was for residents and relatives to be able to see each other through not just the physically darker hours of the winter, but the emotional dark hours of the depths of you know, a dreadful third wave of the pandemic, and that we didn't have to keep people separate, we could actually have people together. And many people with dementia would have found it very difficult to engage through tablets, which, you know, were the obvious thing. Just to real whiz through a few things, what residents have been saying around enjoying art in exercise online. This lady really engaging with Zoom and Skype and learning new hobbies through the pandemic and connecting with new people. This person really engaging with the ballet. We've got a big relationship with ballet with our residents. It's hugely popular with our residents, and that's been wonderful to be able to keep that going, as well as things like Zumba dance. And, you know, the choir, I love this one, you know, this lady just saying, I could shout to my heart's content because the microphone's muted, so people can't hear me. And it just makes me wonder what her neighbours thought, but she was really happy, and it just, singing is a great therapy through these times. I wanted to just quickly touch and briefly on some of the other things we've done around our properties as well. We've got these new QR codes in all of our schemes near the entrance, and it means that hands-free, any resident, relative, member of staff, any visitor at all can get all of the safety information about that scheme onto their own device, just through a QR code. And I just think that was a wonderful way to be transparent about how safe our schemes are and make sure information's shared. This is a picture of the 9th of January 2020, just before, you know, we were just hearing about issues in China at the time, weren't we? This was, this group here are what we called the Dora designers. They were a group of residents that used to live in this scheme called Dora House in Westminster. They helped to design a new scheme. They've moved out, and this was them watching the demolition event. So that was the 9th of January, and this was just recently. The developer has found ways to keep going on site, and I believe is still 4 weeks ahead of programme. They have been meticulous in the way they've managed COVID safety on site, and I really take my hat off to them that they've managed both the supply chain and their own resourcing through the project. A really commendable effort from Regal Homes. We're going to see this video about our loneliness and isolation report, which was very important to us. We've managed to make contact with 10 new partners that want to engage with us and our residents and offer additional support, which is just a really good outcome for us. It enabled us to find more people that needed a wellbeing call in addition to the on-site team. And it just helped us to get under the skin of some of those little niggles, like repairs that people didn't want to report, or benefits that they didn't really want to talk, you know, mention that they needed, or little grumbles. And I think that's brought us much closer to our residents. So I hope you enjoy the video, and happy to take any questions at the end. And then, you know, just lastly, next week we're going to be taking part in the National Day of Reflection, and we're going to be doing that as a whole organisation by a Teams call, and I know that many of you will as well. And I just wanted to really express my deep thanks to everybody in the sector, and my own organisation and my own colleagues, but to everybody on the call as well, and the Housing Lin and everybody that has just worked so hard through this pandemic. Have been marvellous. So all good to you. I'm going to play the video now, so I hope you enjoy, and like I say, happy to take any questions afterwards.
Isolation for me is what the world is going through at the moment. But this issue of isolation is becoming tough, very tough.
Isolation is actively taking yourself out of the community or being taken out of the community. That is actually being alone. That is being you and your four walls, and can lead to feelings of loneliness and depression, anxiety, and all of those sort of things. So isolation is more the physical act, whereas loneliness is the mental feeling.
Even in normal times, lots of people feel lonely. It's had a lot of effect on many people I know.
One of the practical things of avoiding loneliness and isolation is to talk to people. So I'm in constant touch with my sons and my wife as well. So that helps a lot, very much. It helps very much to talk to people.
It's exploring. It's all about exploring. Walking, doing walks, and properly exploring. I've been to some amazing places that I didn't even know where they were before, you know, and I've done lots of that, and that's a favorite for me.
Since the COVID pandemic, I've learned to cook. I could only cook eggs previously, and I think I've become quite a good cook.
Read something nice, something enjoyable. Knit if you like knitting. Embroider if you like embroidering. And go inside yourself. I have already taken my first lessons in life of ballet. It has kept me going.
We've assisted residents during the pandemic in several different ways. The most important, without a doubt, is just checking in. And that's enabled us to be a signpost for a whole host of different things. On a personal level, it's really been a case of just being here. Having the office operate as normal during the pandemic has really been invaluable.
So we've had online Zumba classes, we've had online arts and crafts, online singing classes, online exercise classes. Not only has that meant that the residents are interacting with someone from CNC, but they're also actually interacting with their other residents, with their neighbours and their friends that they may not have been able to see like they would be before.
After this experience of the lockdown, looking after ourselves and looking after other people around us, I don't think I will ever feel lonely or isolated.
So, yes, so Jerome, would you like me to just go through the questions? I can see that there's been some questions posted.
Yes, yeah, if you don't mind doing that, yes, we can go through the questions now.
Okay, good. All right. Thank you for the comments and questions, and hope you enjoyed the video. So the first one is about the adaptability, really, and how residents responded to moving things online. Staggeringly well, I think, and it just goes to prove and debunk any myths that people of our, of this age group can interact online. Absolutely. Some needed a bit more help than others, but yeah, they've done a really good job at getting online. And yes, things will remain online after lockdown. Absolutely. As well as, not instead of. So I think it's a good thing. It's a good thing to do. And there's a question about extra care housing and how did we support people in extra care housing? I think same really as we've done in care and housing. I think there hasn't been too much difference. We've just absolutely thrown ourselves at it, been there, supported residents, made sure the resourcing was there, and done it absolutely as much as we can to support residents. And I think the response has been similar across everything really.
There's also a question that's come up in the chat box, actually. It's not quite in the Q&A box. Is how do you ensure that all your residents have access online?
Well, that's a really good question. We've got free Wi-Fi in our schemes. Our schemes are old in some cases. They were built in the 60s and 70s and very big and multi-story. So sometimes that Wi-Fi access is really difficult. Where we've had a resident that's wanted to get online that hasn't been able to access the free Wi-Fi signal, we've been providing dongles for people. We've been providing packs for our on-site teams so that they have the resources they need on one-to-one to get people who are struggling to get online. And we've been giving tablets away, but it's you know, by no means a finished task, because we just have to keep encouraging people and making sure that they've got the equipment. When they've got the equipment, that they know how to use the equipment, and that when they know how to use the equipment, they can actually get online through connectivity as well. So it's quite a big task, I think.
And Julie, I've got a question for you, because obviously I've known CNC for many years, and the work that you've done both creatively, but around your value base, around engaging wholeheartedly with residents pre-COVID. Do you think that actually made a significant difference in terms of being able to translate that to a live mode and supporting people during COVID, and particularly in the first two lockdowns?
Yeah, I mean, it changed things. There's no doubt about it. It changes things. You know, there's nothing like being all in the same room and figuring out stuff together or playing. You know, the Dora designers, we had bits of paper and, you know, we had mock-up rooms and we had all sorts of things and we had fun together, and we, you know, we had a relationship in a way that was very, very special, and certainly a highlight, I think, of my career. That's not quite the same online, but it can be done online. And I think that's, you know, going back to the beginning of my presentation, it was focusing on what we can do rather than what we couldn't do. And I think that was really needed at the time and still is needed now. But there's benefits to getting people online and doing things differently. So I think there's a blend that is going to be fit for the future, where sometimes you get together in person and other times you get together online, and you can just reach more people.
Just before we move on to Tim, because there's one final question that's just come up in the Q&A box. I don't know if you've seen that. What are the situations and services you would like to keep in the new normal, and which one would you like to go back as before COVID?
Oh, look, I just desperately want to go back and have some time with our residents and staff as well. You know, just being in that room and having an experience together is priceless, and nothing in the world would ever replicate that. The things that I would like to keep, I think, are digital citizenship for people. So we're actually promoting that you have a really important, active life that are, you know, you're fully participating not only in CNC, but in local news, in local politics, in influencing your local area, in volunteering, in supporting other people. And you've kind of heard of a bit of that from our residents. And I think that's something that absolutely must have all of our focus.
Well, let's come back to that. I think, you know, you've really laid out some excellent examples of how CNC has adapted, has been innovative, has been flexible. As you say, this is both about the relationship you've got with your customers, but also how your staff have adapted to changes as well. I think you've really, I know many of them are with us on the call, so can I applaud you, but also thank you for an excellent presentation. And without further ado, I think, Tim, you'll be familiar with a lot of the things that have come through and how people have applied technology and some of those digital inequalities that Julia highlighted. So, Tim, Chief Executive of Appello, over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to keep that theme going that Julia ended her presentation with. So, Jerome, if you could put the slides up for me, please. Sure. I want to talk particularly about that social isolation and loneliness. And I want to do that from the platform of understanding that this is a challenge that has been with us long before COVID and has only and has certainly gained additional attention, but had significant focus before COVID, and rightly so. I'll just move on to the next slide, if I may, Jerome. Create the distinction, or certainly the way that the campaign to end loneliness looks at it, between social isolation and loneliness. Now, they can be one and the same thing to some extent, but they can also be separate and distinct. Social isolation is about the amount of contact you have with people. Loneliness is about and I think there was a quite a good description in the video, is about the way you feel about whether or not you're seeing people. So as the quote here reflects, you can be in a crowded room and still feel lonely if you don't feel connected to people, if you don't feel engaged with those people you're with. It's not about how many people you see as much as how deep is your connection with them. And we think this is a really, really important point. And one of the things that Appello has worked very hard over the last few years is to incorporate into our solutions and our offers for our customers a capability, a platform for them to be able to build a more connected environment for their customers. For those who aren't familiar, Appello is a 30-plus-year-old British organisation who started out in telecare monitoring and are these days the largest telecare monitoring provider in the UK, the most experienced provider of digital telecare solutions. And as part of that, we've focused very much over the last few years of bringing an improved living experience to communal living environments. And I'll talk about how that platform can help as part of a wider, but only help as part of a wider set of solutions to address that challenge of both social isolation and loneliness, and recognizing that, as we've just touched on, those two can be the same, but they could also be separate things for different people in different circumstances. If we move on to the next slide, please, he said in his best Chris Whitty voice, there are a couple of challenges which are probably widely known, but it's helpful to have numbers around them. And I'll start with the middle one first, which is that the most common barrier to inclusion, whether that's loneliness or social isolation, are mobility issues, typically in the 70-plus age category. Now, that is not a surprise to many people, but it does influence how we need to think about the services that we as providers to that age group focus on delivery. And if 38% of those over 70 have mobility issues, then straight away you see there's a huge core that would be widely understood to almost everybody on this call that are naturally inhibited to some degree from a more connected social environment. The good news, and I think this touches very much on the theme that Julia has just demonstrated, is that 56% of people that the campaign to end loneliness surveyed are out of that age category believe that technology can aid the communication gap and it can make a difference. And we've got very real evidence, and I'll talk about it a little bit more, that absolutely underpins what Julia said, that technology, and I put that in inverted commas, is not a barrier. There not being value or it being hard to use, that is absolutely a barrier to adoption. But technology per se is no barrier. And it is all about, does it add enough value? Is it easy enough to use? How it works isn't relevant to most of the people. So whether it's uber smart, cloud-based, high processing computing power, that has no bearing. It's all about, can I use it simply? Can I remember how to use it repeatedly and easily? And does it give me enough value? Does it give me enough improvement in my life if I do adapt to it and use it? So let's move on to the next slide, because it picks up and continues this theme. And this, given the sector that Appello are in, is a somewhat shocking but potentially exciting statistic, which is that a third of people that were surveyed, so of this over 70 category, felt that social alarms were the second most favoured means of communication after the telephone. Now, as a provider of monitoring services, we saw that in spades at the weekend. So a Sunday, normal call volumes for us, about 5,000 calls into the monitoring centre. Mothering Sunday, no particular storms, no particular global UK-wide weather or other emergencies, nearly 10,000 calls. So an almost doubling on that day versus a typical Sunday. And what was the main theme that our operators reported? A lot of additional calls and extended calls, because people were, those were the calling, were expressing or sharing some sense of loneliness or a desire to have human contact, even if it wasn't for the strict purposes that an emergency alarm should be used for. So I think that, you know, and this is, bear in mind, this is just a pull a cord, press a pendant. This is not a fully engaged experience, and yet we saw a near doubling on Mothering Sunday, which again tells this really strong story that people need that engagement. And the good news is that, as Julia and her team found, about 2/3 of those people over 70 in the category feel that seeing the face of the person they are in talking to improves the conversation. Well, of course, that is no surprise, but when you think about the fact that the telephone is the most preferred method of communication for the majority of that cohort, it does show how much of an improvement we can make to their quality of life. They've used the telephone because they're comfortable with it, they understand it, not because it is the limit of their ambitions for how they would like to communicate in a really engaged fashion. So why don't we move on to the next slide? I'll give an example of how we've worked with our housing providers, C&C being a great example, there being a number of others, where we've introduced video technology as part of the emergency call system. So you have a choice when you replace a warden call system. You can either replace it and try and get it to do the same thing but in a digital environment, or you can upgrade it so that it adds to the quality of life of residents. And with C&C and Housing 21, Guinness and Orbit and a number of other housing providers, we've been taking them and helping them on their journey of giving their residents a more inclusive living environment, one where there is access to room-to-room, apartment-to-apartment video calling, a video to the house manager or house manager back to the apartment, all in a very simple to use, 2-button touch, very, very easy user interface environment with good quality speech, good quality video, that makes it a much easier experience to communicate, particularly if you have mobility challenges. And we've got circa 15,000 end customers of our roughly 200,000+ end monitoring customers who are now on the Smart Living Solutions digital journey with us. And we surveyed about 1,000 of those. 1 out of 2 felt that their well-being had improved as a result of Smart Living Solutions being deployed in their apartment, which is a huge testament, I think, to the difference that quality communication can make to the living experience, particularly of those who are challenged in a socially excluded manner. And what we weren't surprised at all by, but were delighted to see, was that in March of last year, we saw a very significant uplift in the video apartment to apartment calling and video to house manager to video. In one housing provider over a couple of months, it grew by 160+%, which is just testament to how, when you have that option to physically connect removed, the desire to do so, at least through some type of manner, becomes prevalent. If we move on to the next slide, please, Jerome. We added 2 other features when we first introduced Smart Living Solutions a number of years ago, which help with this theme of social inclusion. The first is an I'm OK function, so a simple icon to tap, which can tell a house manager whether someone wants or doesn't feel they need any type of contact that day. Also, we've built the capability for this to be used on a tablet or smartphone for that matter, because the British standards require Smart Living Solutions is permanently powered and permanently mounted, so it's wall-based, and it's done so that, for the obvious reasons, as an emergency alarm with its primary focus, we need the resident to always know where it is and that it's permanently powered. But by having a mirror application available on smartphones and tablets, they can use some of the features such as the video calling or the video door entry from their convenience of the sofa or from their bed. And, you know, anybody who is challenged with their mobility, being able to see who is at the front door on a tablet or a smartphone, whether they're on their sofa or in their bed, and to be able to let them in is a huge boon and a real step forward in the engagement that you can provide, or the living experience you can provide to those who are elderly or vulnerable. So let's move on to the last couple of slides, please. Some food for thought here about different ways that technology can help tackle social isolation. Some are fairly obvious, such as the enabling families and loved ones to stay connected. Some are connected to that, but a little bit more tangential. So, for example, videos, photos being on a shared site which residents have access to, which with their friends and family might upload, giving them a greater sense of being connected to what's going on in the family's life. And Julia mentioned this one down at kind of 5 o'clock, if you imagine the clock face a little bit. Educate and learn new skills. The amount of opportunity through technology to give people access to, at a really simple level, it could be basic YouTube tutorials on knitting. At a more engaging level, it could be those online Zumba classes that CNC have been running. There's a proliferation of different ways that technology can be used. And this is just scratching the surface, because on the next slide, there is a mixture of things which, if we move on to the next slide, please, Jerome. On the next slide, there is a mixture of what is available now and what will be available, and that forward-thinking organizations should start to consider over the years ahead. So, of course, internet connectivity and social network sites are here and now. The social network sites, I think, can evolve more to be particularly focused on how you provide engagement for the elderly and vulnerable, but that the principles of those exist. What is proven technology but still not yet widely adapted or anywhere near adapted or adopted would be, for example, 3D virtual environments. We know that augmented reality and virtual reality are an absolute game changer in terms of how they can let people experience being in either environments or family situations, giving them a sense of certainly visual inclusion, and over the years to come, that will evolve to being about smell, taste, touch. You combine a 3D environment with 3D printers, and you can have a a really, really amazingly inclusive environment, yes, of course, it's high cost, but that's at today's pricing. As these things evolve over the years ahead, pricing will fall dramatically, and it's not unrealistic to imagine that a 3D environment with the associated equipment and experiential improvements that could give could be the same price as a modest price tablet now. So I do think there's a really exciting world ahead of us. And with all of these things, as I said, it is not about, and move on to the last slide for us, and I'll just sum up here. It's not about the use of technology. It's about an understanding of the individual's needs. So are we confident? How do we get confident about what good inclusion, what good social inclusion, what low levels of loneliness look like for different individuals that we call customers? Because I guarantee you, and we all know this, it won't be the same. Some people are far happier in their own company than others. So having that personal sense of a social inclusion well-being plan as part of a wider well-being plan, I think will become more and more prevalent. There are, of course, financial and physical barriers to overcome to make sure people have access to the right technology, services, tools, and that needs thinking through. Training, support, those still need thinking through. But the one that I think we can debunk from the outset, but it remains an obstacle while people still believe it's there, is this theme that both Julia and I have referred to, which is this perceived fear of technology. If I take that 3D augmented reality environment as a closing point, if I said to anybody 75 years old, how would you feel about a 3D augmented environment? They'd say, you know, I'm fairly sure 99+% of them would say, and you know, NFW, that's not for me. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't understand it. If I said, I'd like to put some headphones and glasses on you, and then you can sit in the same room as your son and daughter, even though they're in Australia, would you be up for that? I don't think we'd get more than a few percent who would say, no, that's not for me. It's all about the perception being nonsense and the reality and the practicality and the deliverability and the usability being considered for the right audience. And with that, I'll hand back to Jeremy and pass over for questions.
Tim, thank you for a very illuminating presentation. And on that 3D and reality, I know many a man in some extra care schemes who would love to do that and be on the Mallard or the Flying Scotsman from King's Cross to York.
And isn't that a great example, right? Because all of that is not just possible in the future, that's possible right now. Right now, we could do that for them. It's all about understanding the requirements, the needs, and making it easy and accessible.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things I've seen coming through the pandemic is how gaming technologies have become much more accessible, not just for the under 18s, but for the over 65s as well.
Right.
So again, that's perhaps another question to take on with you and Julia shortly. But we've got a number of questions in the Q&A box, and also Dean in the chat box also raises an important issue that actually a lot of people have got impairments that they've had from birth. It's not just acquired or later life where there may be an onset of a disability or onset. So a really good point, Dean. Thanks for highlighting that. Let me just come back to a few questions. Some of them are anonymous and some of them are named. I'll go back to Carla, who's got a question for you. How would you decide where to fix the screen smart living solution screen? Thinking about the mobility issue of users, in which part of the house is it usually located? When you do your assessments, do you have a view about where those are located?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with our housing providers and take on their views of whatever is likely to be the most appropriate height. We take into consideration always the discrimination, the Disability and Discrimination Act. So in many scenarios, there is a certain 110 or so centimetres or 150 centimetres, gone just for a moment, specific height, but we obviously recognise that for some people that would be stooping too low. So they're chosen based on the requirements that the housing provider imagines will be used. So, you know, as an example, if they're on the 12th floor, that's less likely to be a wheelchair user. On the ground floor, more likely to be a wheelchair user, and therefore different heights may be specified. So quite a long, convoluted answer, but the simple answer is taking into account that the housing providers' requirements of their individual users' anticipated needs.
Thanks. I think that's really helpful, and I think it's. I think what you're also saying is not just because it's extra care housing. It could be somebody who's living on their own in their own home in a non-specialist or supported living environment. So you work very closely with either their OT or the home improvement agency, for example, to help specify where the best use may be. And another query, a couple have come through anonymously, very much linked to about the use of videos. How have your customers adapted to video? Does your offer video to your call center? Does your offer video to your call center operators? So anything about the use of videos there?
So I'll do the second one first. We currently don't do video into the monitoring center, and the reason for that, it ties very much to that point about the loneliness conversation. So we are conscious that this is an emergency call system first and foremost. Rather than it just be an emergency call system, we made it more inclusive and to offer better lifestyle benefits. But what we don't want is to encourage additional use of that emergency feature as a loneliness or befriending service. We don't want to tie up operators who are being inundated because they're a friendly face. And, you know, like every monitoring centre, all of our operators are brilliantly empathetic. So you don't, you know, the last thing you want them doing is being an emergency video touch base for those who are lonely. What we're looking at is a separate befriending service that uses that same video technology, but doesn't sit or occupy people who are taking emergency calls.
Right. In fact, that then sort of answers the other questions. How then can monitoring centres do more for people experiencing, and what will this impact emergency services do? So are you in effect saying some of this will be very preventative and reduce perhaps demand on more critical care, or enabling people to live healthier for longer at home rather than having to have a move?
We absolutely believe that. All of the stats say, and you know, they're horrific, some of them, aren't they, about the loneliness is the equivalent of 13 cigarettes per day, or you know, those sorts of things. We absolutely believe that a proactive set of engagements can really underpin a healthier, longer life, keep people in better condition. And you know, you can reflect it from Julia's video that it was evident how much more spring in the step those people felt they had when they were describing the activities post inclusion rather than during the peak of their loneliness sensations.
Well, that's really interesting. And one of the things we've done in Berlin is to produce an A to Z of different ways to support people at home through loneliness and isolation. And some of the things that both you've highlighted and Julia highlighted are captured in that. So I'll ask Jerome to put that up on the website. Julia, can I come back to you? Are there any final thoughts that you have, both of what you've heard from Tim, but also things that have been triggered as the conversation has been going on during this happy hour?
Yes, I think, thanks, Tim. It's always good to hear from you. You're just such a passionate and a real leading light on all of this stuff, and I love what you're doing. No, genuinely.
Turning up just for that.
Genuinely.
Well, I'm afraid I can't offer the champagne for happy hour.
Maybe one day soon. I think one of the interesting things that Appello are putting into their new units is this local Wi-Fi connection. So in my talk, I was talking about having to get dongles out to people. We're on a program actually with Appello, but actually if we can get that free Wi-Fi inside people's flats so that we don't have the the physical barriers of walls that, you know, prevent Wi-Fi signals getting through, then that's quite a stride forward in that digital citizenship, because no matter what kit you've got, if you haven't got a connection, it's useless, isn't it, apart from the stuff that's on the kit itself. So I think that's really important. And I think the other thing, which I didn't know you're doing, Tim, is the befriending service. And actually, we've been having discussions about this, about what the future of call centres is going to be in the future. And, you know, a lot of experience that we've had through the wellbeing calls and how important they are and what a lifeline they are. But actually, a call centre type approach means that we can do sort of push and pull contacts. So we might be receiving calls from people who need a listening ear, but actually we can use technology and smart prompts and things like this to push things out to people. So if we've got a program of what we've noticed, I guess, in you know, in some of the getting people engaged with each other and with activities, is actually sometimes people just need a personal invitation. So you assume that you've invited everybody, but unless you've actually personally invited somebody, they still don't, maybe, you know, if you're a bit anxious, might not be able to come. Well, actually, you know, this technology could play a huge part in that, couldn't it, around you know, AI and trying to understand patterns of behaviour or people that need more contact than others, and actually pushing opportunities their way and trying to make the first contact, I suppose. And that's been a part of our strategy right from 2017. It's quite tough for a small organisation to do that, but if you've got a bigger platform for that, I think that's incredible.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, can I just, sorry, Tim.
No, go on.
Julia, I really like what you're talking about, digital citizenship. And Tim, is it all right if I just ask Julia a question about that, and I'll come back to you?
Yeah, go for it.
As you know, you're a commissioner on our HAPPI inquiry, and I think this is something which really needs to come to the fore. And I noticed on one of our participants, I don't know if he's still with us, is a dear old friend of the LIN, Phil Morgan, and Phil does a lot of work around governance and engagement issues. And I'm just wondering whether you think there is a connection here between both digital citizenship for delivery of care and support, but also how residents, tenants can be more actively engaged in governance in organisations like yours. This
is a question for Phil.
No, for you, Julia, initially.
For me, sorry. I thought this was a question for Phil.
Box, that'd be great. But,
yeah, no, it's good. It's good. Sorry, I can't see you, Phil, but if you're on the call, it's good. I saw your comment earlier, so it's good to have you on the call. And yeah, Phil and I have done some work previously, and I know how passionate Phil is about this, and we are as well. I think this is just a real key to getting residents in a place where they really meaningfully interact with an organisation. And I guess, you know, I'm talking to a group of people that will understand that often in an organisation you get feedback from a certain cohort of people. And there may be the confident ones that can push themselves forward and push their ideas and thoughts forward. Actually, to be able to get that level of engagement from people who are maybe more introvert and less confident in a group, to be able to push that thought forward, I think is a real key to getting this right, and all the stuff that's in the white paper. And bringing that into governance, because we've got a platform where we can get real feedback from not just a small cohort, but a bigger cohort of people, and really get a more balanced view about what people really think as well. And actually we can be replaying our responses to that in a more open and transparent way as well.
Oh, thanks, Sue. And you mentioned the white paper, and just to clarify for those people who may be coming from a health and social care background, this is not the Department of Health's integration white paper. This is the MHCLG's housing white paper, which is a lot more in the fore to tenant engagement. Tim, do you have any examples where your clients and customers are using this not for care readiness, but actually to have a better dialogue with residents in terms of their participation, in terms of management, you know, even in terms of how schemes are managed?
there are a few points that I'd play back into that. Let's pick the digital inclusion piece, though, the digital citizenship first. One of the most important things there is to not assume that it has to be in a particular format, or digital inclusion is a particular hallmark for everybody. In the way that Julia described, if you give access to connectivity, then you can find out what actually really is of value to them. For some people, it will be as simple as being able to join an online knitting club, and that's it. That's all they want from digital inclusion. Others will have far more aspirations for it, but it's about understanding this. What do you want to achieve with it? What's the value of it to you? And not starting with the principle of, well, we're going to take you digital. What do you want to achieve? The second thing I would say about how do you use this to make as much engagement as possible? We had a fantastic story about, during the first lockdown, how some of the residents' committees were being run, and they had double the amount of attendance because people were able to do it from the convenience of their apartment using video, whereas normally, you know, for whatever reason, they didn't feel able to or didn't want to come downstairs and join and sit in the communal lounge for a couple of hours, listening to various bits and pieces that, you know, they weren't sure if it was going to be relevant to them. But being able to join from the comfort of their sofa and go and make a cup of tea when it suited them, you know, drove up attendance and engagement with resident matters. So I think there are some really good examples, but it all comes back to this principle of, don't start with technology, start with, what do I want to get more of, less of, and then you can start thinking about what the enablers of that might be. Oh, Jeremy,
on mute.
That's a classic. That's my first of the day. It's coming up to 5:10. I'm clearly in need of a drink, but we've got two final questions in our Q&A box. The first is from Housing London chair, Margaret Edwards, and I'm delighted that Margaret can join us. And she's talking here very much about personal experience with her mother. And I wonder if I can just ask Julia this first, about whether you think that, you know, there's issues around outdoor visiting pods can be quite confusing and things like this. So any views about, you know, how augmented reality would work for somebody with onset of dementia? Could it be comforting or could it be confusing?
I think, you know, everybody with a dementia is different. We know that, right? So I think, you know, and what might work for one person one day isn't going to work the next day, but it might work the day after. So I think it's like anything, and it's a bit what Tim was saying, you know, don't start with the technology, start with what we want to achieve. What we found is that there has been, and our outdoor visiting pods are all in our care homes, and all of our care homes specialise in dementia. And we've had an overwhelming positive experience across the board, and they're really well used. And the sheer joy, and I'm actually really passionate about this one, that, you know, when you move to a care home, you should still be a really active member of your community, digital or otherwise, but preferably physically. And one of the most important things for us to be able to be oriented in our environment is actually to put a coat on and a hat on and a pair of boots, especially if it's cold outside. That connects you with a sense that the seasons are perhaps autumn or winter. Making the pod a destination, I think, has been the really important thing. So we've tried to, you know, certainly at Christmas, we made it almost like a little Christmas grotto, and it's like going to another, you know, another venue. There's a little walk there, there's a celebration. You get there, you know, when you get there, it feels like another little home. And I think that's been really important for people as well. The visits in the pods have been quite short, and I think that's because of infection control. But probably that does help with the visiting as well for people with certain stages of dementia that might you know, might struggle for a longer period of time as well. So, but you know, it's adapting all the time, adapting, and that's what we do really.
Well, that's great. And the final question, which really is it could be the whole session on itself, is how can we identify those that are lonely before it's too late for them to become engaged in something? You know, is it about how do you capture their mood? Are there telltale signs, indicators, and things like that? So, any experience of that? Either of you?
I do have something to say on this, but Tim, do you want to? I've just been talking a lot. Did you want to?
One of the things that we are passionate about is using technology allied to caring, empathetic people. So we don't think technology is a replacement for caring, empathetic people. We think it enables caring, empathetic people, whether they're Julia's frontline housing staff, whether they're our contact center operators. Technology enables those people to be able to do a better job because they have greater insights. And I think this is a really, really interesting question about what do those insights look like? What do the lead indicators look like? But you know, there's some really simple stuff you can do, like noting how many times a person has been visited. That campaign from loneliness survey that I quoted a few stats from, probably the most upsetting one to me was that for about 27% of the over 70s, the person they see most in life is the postman. I mean, how shite is that, right? I mean, it just, you know, it doesn't, you know, it just doesn't bear thinking about. So, you know, you can create some fairly simple metrics, particularly in a sheltered housing environment, about how often have people had any type of engagement. And if you know a little bit about their personality, and Julia's people know a great deal about her residents, they will know, is twice a week enough for Patricia, or is that nowhere near enough and it needs to be 2-3 times a day? And I would start off with that as a really basic starter for 10 of having insight into people and just taking some common assessment of whether or not they were getting what they need.
Thanks, that's helpful. And Julia, do you want to add to that?
Yes, and we have multiple touch points. And I think the more that we talk about loneliness and isolation, and the more that we make, how can I put it? The more people kind of own it when they're working with residents in our schemes, the more inroads we can have. So for instance, one of the most likely people to get through the door of somebody who's actually really anxious to let somebody in because they've lost their confidence, or, you know, there's some other mental health issues getting in the way, is our repairs team. We've got an in-house repairs team. And I think for me, you know, we're not quite there yet, but the next stage will be completely skilling them up. And again, it comes back to, you know, starting with the thing you want to achieve and then finding technology to kind of support that. So how can a repairs operative, who's the only person who's got through that door all year, actually notice what's going on in the home and feed quickly, because they're on to the next call and the next call, feed that information back to the right person. And I was just going to say, you know, technology is not always the answer to pick up through sensors and things. I can remember 20 years ago, I think, I was working in a housing association in Bristol and got very excited because they just brought out a computer that lived under the stairs that linked to a mirror that could sense mood and whether you looked happy or sad. And of course, that technology has been around there for decades now. But has it ever been adopted? Not really, because what do you do with all that information? You need somebody to respond to it. So, you know, just getting information from technology is not always the answer. And I agree with Tim. You need people on the ground to be watching out and skilled up. And some of the work, you know, we've been doing through the HAPPI thing is about upskilling people, isn't it? Around, you know, what's needed, you know, what's going to be the most help, and then where does technology fit into that?
It's interesting because it also raises a number of other things, which again could be another happy hour in the future, which is around how to be compassionate. And there are models around compassionate caring communities coming through, and a lot of this is about identifying through behaviours. As you say, it could be the repairs, it could be the catering staff, it could be the cleaner, who actually will have the day-to-day contact in many cases with many residents. So this will roll on, and thank you very much, Julia and Tim, for both your excellent contributions. As Jerome sort of highlighted at the outset, the presentations, recording of this session and the video, Julia, that you shared will be available very shortly, either for the Housing Lynn weekly bulletin that comes out on a Friday or early next week. If you have found this happy hour of enormous benefit, and I know one or two of you in the chat box have said this is your first, you've really enjoyed it, we're going to have a short break between now and Easter, and then we resume immediately after Easter. And we're delighted to have the Bishop of Kensington, who was the Vice Chair of the Church of England's Commission on Housing, looking at issues around housing crisis, and the recommendations that he made through the Archbishops of Canterbury and York to look at how the church can use more of its land, and also the support services for homeless adults as well as homeless families, as well as looking at development of specialist housing. So do join us in future happy hours. And on the dementia point that Julia answered, I know that colleagues from the Lynn were on the call who contributed to the APPG report on dementia. Are we ready? We're running 2 happy hours on that in April and May. So please, if you're interested in that, do sign up for those. But in the meantime, can I thank personally 2 great friends of the Lynn, Tim and Julia, for your support, and Jerome, thanks for your assistance in the background. Bye from us and goodbye from him.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you very much. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.